It's always the basics. It's nothing spectacular. And you would think when you look at the best of the best, and we are looking at the best and fastest rowers in the world of 2017, that these people would be flawless and free from faults, technique faults, rowing specific technique faults. And you will come to the conclusion that, oh God, they are not. They are not free from faults. So if you feel discouraged and say, I will never be as good as they are, quite often it's a matter of experience, it's a matter of physique, and the ones who have lesser technical flaws with comparable physique will be faster. That's, ladies and gentlemen, quintessentially what this video is all about. Now, as you have endured the long prologue, let's get started with today's video. These series of races started off with the race Italy versus Italy. Now, this is not just Italy versus Italy. This is Oppo and Ruta. Back then, these were the second fastest lightweight double rowers in the world. And Mondelli and Rambaldi. These were the third fastest heavyweight double scullers in the world. So it's not like it's a nobody. Now, on the left, you see Oppo and Ruta, Oppo in bow, Ruta in stroke. And on the right, you see the heavyweights, Mondelli and Rambaldi. And you will think, it's a clear thing, heavyweights are going to win. Well, they're not. Watch the full race on the Henley Royal Regatta channel, I recommend. But let's just get the few basics that we want to look at. So if we look at the lightweights, which are here in the picture, and you go through everything frame by frame, you'll see that if you look at stroke, he's able to hold the trunk very nicely, push with the legs, and wait for the blade connection without changing the upper body angle. So what you see quite often is that people will start to engage the upper body around the hip joint very early at the catch. This happens usually when you have issues to hold all the force that is going through your body at that stage. Not so the Italian lightweight stroke guy. However, what you see is a significant bend here in the low back where my cursor is. So this would be right there. So every time the stroke guy takes a stroke and does a full leg drive, his low back, right where the bend is, has to hold and withstand a lot of force. And the problem with this is that eventually it's going to tire you out. At that stage, they're in the lead. Lightweights usually have faster starts than heavyweights, usually, because there's less mass to be moved. Now, a word on heavies and lighties. I think a lot of heavyweights are simply too heavy. Why? Because a lot of selections are being done on linear drive ergs, and linear drive ergs favor heavy people. Why? Because you're not moving yourself, you're moving an air fin. Some people use formulas where they say, okay, we use a weight-based formula to create a level playing field. No, it doesn't work, because there are different dynamics involved within a race. You cannot apply a linear factor to a race that is always progressive. It just doesn't work. So I think a lot of heavyweights are heavy for the sake of being faster on the erg, and it doesn't pay. Now, a lot of lightweights are too light. They are as light as they have to be for lightweight standards. But if they could gain just 2 kilos more of muscle mass, so let's say instead of 70 kilo average, they would be 72 kilo average or 75 kilos average, then they would be faster than the overweight heavyweights. It's as simple as that. I will give you a few numbers just in a moment. Let's continue with the analysis. So we have established that the stroke of the Italian lightweight double does have an issue with the low back stability. The question is, how will this unfold? If you go through the drive, you see at that stage, the shoulder is significantly higher than it should be. Why? Well, I think because he doesn't transfer force through the lat, or vice versa. Because his shoulder is so high, he cannot transfer force through the latissimus dorsi. Now, the latissimus dorsi is one of the most important muscles to transfer force down. If we look at the human body, the part of it that is almost designed for rowing is everything above your kneecaps all the way up just below your chest. These are the most essential parts. Now the shoulders are a weak point. Why? Because they're not interconnected to the body through bones. They're interconnected through tendons and ligaments, but not through bones. And the issue here is that if you can't control your shoulder position and brace your shoulder properly, then you have an issue that your shoulder will simply be dragged up. There's a lot of force involved. I mean, these guys are pulling lots of watts. So of course, the weakest point will give in. They have carbon backwing riggers. They have carbon oars. The boats are made of carbon. That is all pretty rough stuff. It's very robust. The least robust part of this entire construct of boats, water, and rower is certainly the rower. And within the rower, the weakest parts of the entire body are the pelvis and the shoulders. And this is precisely where the stroke guy of the Italians has his issues, or had his issues. The two weak points, the pelvic tilt is number one, and the shoulder control is number two. And these are the 2 points that are quintessentially responsible for either you being able to transfer all the force you've got or not being able to transfer all the force you've got. Now you have to keep in mind that Pietro Ruta was one of the fastest lightweight rowers the world has ever seen. And I wonder how fast he could have been with, excuse my expression, proper technique. Now a lot of people may disagree and say, oh, what do you mean, it's faster than blah, blah, blah. Yes. But I'm not talking about how fast he was on an absolute standard. I wonder how fast he was in comparison to how fast he could have been. And there's a series of very good rowers where you could ask the same question. Mahai Drysdale, in my humble opinion, is another one. So if he had these two issues not, where would he have been? Now let me explain why there is an issue. I think the low back bend is pretty obvious. The low back bend essentially creates another turning point of forces where, naturally speaking, there is none. So the hip joint is a very natural turning point of forces, but the low back certainly is not. What you do is you essentially you torture your erectors and the small stabilizers around your spine. And you wonder, okay, why isn't he using the lat? Well, for that is responsible the shoulder. The shoulders disengage the lat, more or less. The question is why? You can try this with me. Now create a wide wingspan here with your lat. Okay, try to blow up your lat as much as you can, as if you were trying to squeeze something in here. If you try to squeeze something, naturally your shoulders will go low. Now, with these wide lats, try to bring up your shoulders. You will automatically feel that you become much narrower here. And with that narrowness means nothing but your lat is disengaging. High shoulders pretty much automatically disengage your lats to a certain degree. And as the latissimus dorsi goes down from the armpit all the way into the low back, this muscle is quintessentially responsible for transferring force through the entire body. Now you may think the best rowers in the world would not have this issue. No, this is not how it works. See, the thing is that usually in the rowing clubs there's excellent technical coaching. There's so many volunteer coaches who are doing great basic work. The moment these athletes become faster, they start to adapt technique habits that are not necessarily beneficial to effective rowing. However, the watts increase, and the watts on the erg increase. Now, the older you get, the more these linear erg standards become more and more important. And I don't really care if we talk about a static linear erg or a so-called dynamic linear erg. It is a linear erg. It is not a true rowing environment indoors, which requires completely different muscles than a linear motion. Now, on a linear erg, a lot of things work from a technical point of view that will never ever work in a true rowing environment. But as most of these tests are done on a linear erg, nobody cares. Now, the issue is that you lose a lot of your good technique and effective technique by adapting to a device that simply does not require a high technique proficiency. And therefore, you lose some of your technique capacity. It's not like you don't know how to do this. We have to differentiate. You know how to do it, but your muscles are not conditioned to do it. You create a different muscle memory pattern. And changing a muscle memory pattern with something that you have done, I don't know how many thousand strokes, well, a highly automized motion takes a long time. Now, most teams work in such a way that you switch from the erg to the water, and immediately you have to prove yourself over and over and over and over and over again. You collegiate rowers know exactly what I'm talking about. My impression is that a lot of teams don't bother to build up athletes anymore. They bother much more to select. And by selecting, your technique suffers. And this is how we end up with athletes who are extremely passionate, extremely disciplined, extremely talented from a physical point of view, from a boat feeling point of view, but their technique for the boat is by no means as good as it could be. By no means. Yet they are the fastest in the world. Why? Because almost all teams work in such an ineffective way. Now, I might offend for you people here, but I'm very open if you could prove me wrong. But everything I see, and I have seen for the last, 30 years, pretty much proves this idea. It will only change if we start to focus on boat-specific technique on land and require that. And I just received a couple of pictures from a friend of mine in Portugal, Ricardo Cardoso. They have a bio rower, they are doing laboratory testing with it. And as there is a 1% accuracy tolerance or a 99% accuracy rate, you get pretty good results, pretty reliable, dependable results. And one of the feedback that I got was that the top athletes in Portugal are saying, it is not as easy to generate high watts. It is possible, but you need to be technically clean. And that's the big game changer. Let's move on with the video. Now the bow, I think, is technically better. He also has, so Stefano Oppo also has that low bend back. Why? Maybe he didn't have it originally. In order to match the way you influence the boat, you sometimes have to match the physique, which means how you're positioned in the boat, the posture, the positioning of the body parts, the muscular tension. And I think this is what happened. If you're in bow and there's a very strong rower with a terribly bent back here, then you will do something alike. And this is pretty much what's happening. And what I think Stefano Oppo is doing much better is he keeps his shoulder lower, which allows him to engage the lat a bit more, which allows him to make much more use of his upper body weight. And this is where these two athletes seem to fall apart a bit. It's exactly during the drive. This phase is just much more effective with Stefano Oppo in bow than with Pietro Ruta in stroke, significantly. At that stage, they were matching again. And this is also, I think this is why there's a tiny difference in blade work. It is a different force curve. The way they build the force is different. In my humble opinion, the stroke leaves the water earlier because there's less connection on the blade. There is less force. It's not better to leave the water earlier. It's worse. Why? Because you can only disconnect if there's not force on the blade. The longer you have force on the blade, the later you will disconnect. And what we are aiming for is not a quick drive through the water. What we are aiming for is a long hold on the water. That's the basic principle of rowing. The water has significantly greater inertia than the boat. Therefore, we need to hold on to the water and use it as an anchor and try to propel off that anchor for as long as we possibly can. Now, the longer we can control our body in such a way that we can keep force on the blades, the longer we will be able to propel the boat off the water. Now, the quicker I lose that connection, the earlier I can get the blades out of the water. And if we just if we just look at the body positioning here, high shoulders, it's very likely that it's just an arm pull, and an arm pull can never ever compensate or continue what legs and upper body have started to create. Therefore, there's a loss of connection. Therefore, there's more washout in stroke. It's that simple. Okay, there's more to be said. Let's look at the heavies. Now, the heavies are less effective. If we just look at the body positioning of the heavyweights, high shoulders, so the same effect on the lat. They're not able to engage the lat at all. if we look at at that phase right now where you actually would want to have a huge upper body swing, the lats are disengaged. It's going through the traps, through the erectors, a huge bend in the back, especially here in stroke. And this works on an erg, but it does not work on a boat. So the question is, are they using the upper body swing? No, they're going legs to arms. So they're not even using an upper body swing momentum, and that's probably the more decisive factor of this all. They're going legs to arms. And if there's a main topic of this video, it could be, if you've got upper body weight, well, please use it. It's there to be used. But if you're heavy and you have to carry around your body weight the entire time, why not make use of your body weight? But if you're going legs to arms, you have the worst of both worlds. You're heavy. You have to carry your heavy body around all the time, and you don't even harvest the body weight. This is like going into the race, and you have a car with 8 gears and 600 horsepower, and all you use is 150 horsepower in the first 3 gears. This would be a good comparison. So let's go back and look at the lightweights. Are they using the upper body swing better? Well, they can't use it as effectively. Because at least stroke has very high shoulders, so the upper body use of that double is given because bow is able to use it pretty effectively. Stroke is trying to swing, but also stroke is going legs to arms, you see. There is never that massive momentum of upper body swing. It's bow, it's Stefano Oppo here, who's trying to bring in the punch of the upper body weight, but he's doing it alone. You would think that the best in the world are doing this better. No, they're not. They're struggling like everybody else. Let's look at the next race. So the lightweights win this against the heavies. Now we're looking at the fastest lightweight double scull of 2017 versus the second fastest lightweight double scull of 2017. So the world champions of 2017 versus the vice world champions from Italy. We know the Italian technique. Let's look at the French technique. Now you're telling me enough, but I haven't heard a word for days. Maybe I'm just one more than you could ever get me from this place. We have 2 of the best scholars that France has ever had, in my humble opinion. It's Jérémy Azou in stroke and Pierre Huon in bow. And these 2 are phenomenal. First of all, they're physiologically superior to most other lightweight single scullers, or to most other lightweight athletes. And secondly, their technique is like it is with most French athletes, just superb. I'm a big fan of French rowing. If you ever have the leisure and the time, just pass by some French small boat or big boat championships and just look at the overall quality of rowing. It is astonishing. It's truly astonishing. Okay, now let's look at these 2. Here at the catch, we see that stroke and bow, so Azou in stroke, Huon in bow, they're trying to use legs before the upper body engages. They're not quite together. So Huon has a different understanding than Azou of how to use body weight. Azou uses it a bit earlier than Huon. Huon is trying to be a bit lower in the boat, trying to use the legs a bit longer before the upper body weight engages. Now, you see the difference? Let's go back a couple frames again. Both of them have the shoulders nice and low. Nice and low. Look at Azou's low shoulders. Huon also has pretty low shoulders. It looks high because he's got his head low and forward. But if he had his head high, like Azou does in stroke, it would look pretty low as well. You can see the lats engaging. This is pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. They are using a nice upper body swing, but, and that's the big however, they're not using it fully together. You see the upper body angle difference here? This is This makes it more visible. There's a slight bit of upper body angle difference, and therefore a slight bit of a different force curve, because the force curve is largely influenced by when you apply body weight. First of all, if you apply body weight, and then when you apply body weight. And if there's any downfall with this legendary French lightweight men's double, they were world champions in 2017 later on, 2 seconds ahead of the Italians, just next to them. Then it is the slightly deviating use of upper body weight, and therefore a slight ineffectiveness. And I think if they were just 2 kilos heavy on average, they could have become open weight world champions. I'm pretty sure about that. Let's delete the drawings and look at them row for a few strokes. There's a slight difference in how they understand to move the boat. At that stage, they're trying to stay calm. They're trying to be very, you see the difference? The French are more rigid. They look straight. The Italians, always to the side. Hey, where are you? The Italians are still here in the lead, but it won't take long until they have lost the lead. Joint upper body use and use of upper body weight cannot be beaten in the long run. If you're physiologically somewhat on par, there is no other way but that you're going to be faster. Okay, let's fast forward. Here the French are in the lead. You can see Jeremy Azou's head. He's trying to use the upper body. He's using the upper body a bit earlier. Pierre Juan is trying to use the upper body in his usual muscle memory pattern, which is a bit later. Nevertheless, they are engaging the lats a bit better. Therefore, they have a higher ratio of upper body weight use, and therefore they're going to beat the Italians. These are the little details that make all the difference. Okay, let's move on to the final race. The final race was very interesting because for the first time we had heavies against lightweights on an even level. And what you see here is nothing less but the world champions in the heavy men's double versus the world champions of the same year in the lightweight men's double. And you see, there is almost nothing in it. But the lighties have to weigh in at 70 kilos average, and the heavies are around 85 kilos. So we're talking about a weight difference of 14 kilos. Now I wonder if the French could have weighed in at 75 kilos average, I think they would have beaten everybody. Everybody. And this is why I personally have come to the conclusion many years ago that at least on a man's side, lightweight rowing doesn't make any sense. But we have to get rid of completely useless linear erg training and testing, because it has nothing to do with rowing. It's a different sport. It has nothing to do with all the fine details that make the sport of rowing the sport of rowing. Okay, let's look at the technique of Harris and Story. One of my favorite, some of my absolute favorite athletes. This is the start phase. And if there's anything I admire endlessly about the New Zealand rowers, is their passionate style of racing. It sounds so cheesy and passion, everything's about passion. This is silly. But I think it truly comes down to your ability to fight or not to fight. If we just look at the three factors. Roundness of the low trunk. Yes, stroke certainly has quite a bit of a bend in the low back. Bow, pretty straight. How high are the shoulders? Well, pretty low. Pretty low here as well. Low shoulders usually means the ability to engage the lat, and that means to engage the entire trunk weight. What about the upper body use? Is it together or is it not together? That is pretty much together. It is short, but it's together. And there is an upper body use. It's not a legs to upper body transition. It's a short and jerky upper body motion, but it is together. And everything you do together, where you join your body mass, this is going to be almost undeniably quick. And I think this is the only reason why the New Zealand double wins. They're not perfect. They have that, you see, he shoots the slide a bit, and there's a bend in the low back, and the angle's a bit weird. You may disagree, but I'm pretty sure that this is the case. The shoulders are not perfectly low, and he could sit a bit higher, like Bow does. Yes, okay, but they are able to use the upper body swing together. Not perfectly. I think they could do it much more. this is where the Sinkovich brothers come in. That legs to upper body transition that is jointly together is undeniably quick. And there's pretty much nothing to hold against them. I don't think that physically speaking, except for the body weight, there's much in it between the two. This is actually mostly about technique, because you also have to consider that the heavies, they have to carry what? More than 20 kilos of extra mass. 20 kilos. I mean, we are concerned about boats being extra light, and is it half a kilo lighter? And then you are as a crew 20 kilo heavier. 20 kilos. And you should be concerned about that. So, of course, this is a disadvantage for the heavyweight double. It is not an advantage. Say, well, yeah, in headwind it is. Okay. But if this is an advantage in headwind, why don't you fill your boat with weight in headwind to have greater inertia? I mean, you have more muscle mass. That's true if you have more muscle mass. But the question is, do they actually have 14 kilos more muscle mass? I highly doubt it. I'm not sure. So, in my humble opinion, the reason why the Kiwis won is because they do have a bit more muscle mass. Yes. And they are using their upper body weight in a more effective way. They're using it more together. Let's look at the start sequence once more. It is not perfect. You see the washout, and that's the post-start phase and all that stuff. But their ability to use upper body weight more together than the others makes the difference. Plus, they're a bit heavier. So if you're heavier and if you have to carry around that body weight, then please use it together. You see, this is a very good shot. At that stage, Bao is using his upper body much earlier than Stroke. It's muscle memory pattern. There's nothing you can do about that. This is how you're wired. How do you say in English? If push comes to shove, I think this is how you call it. So if it's really urgent, then you will always go back and revert to your muscle memory pattern in order to solve a tricky situation. So you can see the difference. Stroke is wired to use the upper body later, while Bao is wired to use the upper body a bit earlier. And Stroke shoots the slide now. See? Legs kick too hard, the low trunk is not able to hold it. It's not able to hold it. If he would be able to have a better pelvic tilt forward, this double could have gone even faster, in my humble opinion. And they became world champions later on. If we look at the World Rowing site, here we are, that's the A final of the World Rowing Championships. They did a 6:10. They won with a couple hundredths of a second ahead of Poland. And interestingly, Mondelli and Rambaldi just a second behind them. There's not much in it. There's really not much in it. You see, it was a 6:13 for the French versus a 6:15 for the Italians. Not much in it. That's pretty much the results we had at Henley. And that's also one of the things I like about Henley. You have high quality crews that are competing against each other, disregarding the weight class. And I think what Henley is doing with this, that they're not separating the weight classes, they're creating a level playing field. And it shows some of the lightweights how fast they actually are compared to the heavyweights. At least on the men's side. On the women's side, I think it's a bit different. But on the men's side, I'm not sure if lightweight rowing makes sense. Because ultimately, you have to be fast. All right. With this, I want to close the video. I hope it makes sense for you and I hope it was interesting. For me, it was a very interesting journey to explore the different techniques. I would like to thank the Henley Royal Regatta for allowing me to use their footage. I will link all 3 races in the description of this video. If you want to work with me, my website is aramtraining.com. I'm looking forward to your comments. I'm looking forward to your subscription, which helps me a lot. And if you could share the video. Now, if you have any ideas or questions or requests, please send them to me on rowing.zone and my handle is @Aram. I will link everything in the description of this video below. With this being said, thank you very much for watching and I'm looking forward to see you in the next video. Bye-bye.